Welcome to B102, which is best practices for building an internal streaming solution. We're going to talk about how you might broadcast things like web meetings or employee training, streaming it through your internal network and how best to do that. We're going to talk about some real-world solutions for distributing such streams, and we're going to do it with a panel of experts who either have done it or help other people do it all the time. You'll notice that we did have one panelist who was not able to make it. Perry Fetterman from Kaltura took ill yesterday, so he's not able to join us, but we will continue on and try and cover everything we need to cover still. Well, let's start with introductions. I'll start. I'm Chris Knowlton with Wowza Media Systems. I will be moderating the panel, and we'll just go down the row and have our panelists introduce themselves.
I'm Andy Howard. I'm the founder and managing director of Howard & Associates, which is a consulting company that helps organizations implement video communications, so both video streaming as well as video conferencing. So I've worked with some large customers such as Deloitte, Aetna, Keurig, the company that makes coffee machines. Those were all sort of streaming applications, building live streaming and on-demand infrastructure. And then also on the video conferencing side, I've done projects with NYU, Anthem, and Pella Windows. So got a pretty good, broad focus on the market, and I kind of sit in between the vendors and the customers and help both sides really get the projects done. So looking forward to the session, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, I'm Mike Newman. I'm the CEO of MediaPlatform. MediaPlatform is in sort of the YouTube of the enterprise space. We focus on large live webcasts. We focus on archival, delivery, and business intelligence and tracking. Prior to joining MediaPlatform, I ran Polycom's video content management division for 3 years. And prior to that, I had a company called Accordant Technologies for about 10 years in the space, which Polycom picked up. So I've seen a lot from the vendor side. Hopefully, I'll be able to share some of that today.
Morning, my name is Dan Sweeney. I'm manager of live production and streaming at LinkedIn. Our team overall, our media team, takes care of everything video and streaming related at LinkedIn, both internal and external shows. And our specific team concentrates on the live shows from this size and up to our external shows. And we work on the streaming platform side of things, and that is typically with a vendor like a MediaPlatform, or in our case, we've got some other vendors that we use. And I came from a world of live streaming sporting events and now shifting over into internal streaming and corporate streaming.
Great. Thank you all for being here and sharing your expertise with us. I'll also make a note that there is a similar session at the same time tomorrow, specifically for education. So if you happen to be in the education market and you want to talk about not only live streaming, which we'll cover here today, but then also flipped classroom and other more education-specific sessions or topics, we'll have a session on that same time tomorrow. Okay, let's move on. I have a few questions for the audience. We'd like to get a better sense for who's here and who is in the room and what it is that you're interested in. So let me ask a few questions by show of hands. How many have not yet deployed a streaming solution in your company? All right, so we have one hand up. All right, so most of you have already deployed some kind of streaming. That makes sense then. Okay. For those of you who then, the broad majority of you then, how many are looking for a way to refine or expand your existing streaming solution? Looks like about, I'd say, 2/5 of the audience is looking to refine or expand. And how many are looking just to replace what you have today with something completely new? Okay, a few hands went up, not many. Okay, so you're looking to build on what you have. That's useful information as we answer questions. And then for any of you who are looking to do that kind of upgrade or expansion, how many of you are looking at a solution for a single department within a much larger organization? All right, nobody. So you're all looking for your whole company, I guess. Is that true? All right, great. Well, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. All right, let's go with questions for the panel then. So for each of you, if you don't mind sharing, what are some of the core streaming media usage scenarios that you're typically focusing on, either for your own company in the case of Dan, or Andy and Mike, you're helping other customers focus on? Let's start with you, Andy.
Yeah, well, I think the live streaming, from my perspective, is the most challenging delivery mechanism. So that's where I see a lot of the business that I do, because companies really have a challenging time trying to figure out an appropriate workflow, how the video is going to play on the network once it's ready to be delivered out there. So that's certainly the most challenging project to implement. I'm seeing a lot on the user-generated content side now, with companies being able to allowing their employees to create little 1 minute, 2 minute clips and post those up to a media management platform, such as MediaPlatform and others, and that allows the organizations to really distribute the knowledge from the knowledge workers out to others, and then with functionality like ranking and popularity functions, that allows the sort of the best content to rise up to the top. Certainly, training has always been an important thing that a lot of companies are doing with video. So that remains very important. So those things are all sort of the corporate communications. How do I get information out to my employees? But additionally, I'm starting to see, and this is where I think that video will really start to take off within organizations, is using video more as an outbound mechanism. So, for example, that project that I worked with at Pella, they actually were using video to interact with clients as kind of like the first call. So they would...
Okay. So scenarios going beyond the firewall in that case.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So they would say, watch these video clips before we meet, and then they would have a two-way video conference with the customer. They would actually show them the windows and things like that. Customer service is another application where video is becoming big, both,
right,
again, from the on-demand perspective. So if a customer service rep figures out an issue for a client, they can just post, create a quick video about it, post it, and then it's available as part of their knowledge base. And then certainly the two-way video is becoming more and more important as well from a customer service perspective. So I think when you start talking about how you can interact with your customers and create revenue and create business, I think that's where video is really going to take off. But for sure, the corporate communications capabilities are very important.
Right. Okay. Mike, how about you?
I guess I'm the only vendor on the panel. We have a very boutique type focus on enterprise webcasting. So a lot of the content that's being created, the vast majority is behind the firewall for like employee consumption. So the drivers of our business are generally like large live webcasts. So you'll get into not only the structure of the content creation within a studio environment or from a telepresence room or whatever that is, but also ensuring that from an infrastructure perspective, you have everything in place to scale to 5, 10, 15, 20,000 people simultaneously and get all the metrics around that. So it is, relatively speaking, compared to other vendors in the space, a pretty narrow focus. With it, you'll get training, you'll get the archival of the content, and of course, sort of the portal environment for protecting and managing and being able to search that content. And that's kind of, I think, table stakes at this point in the video content management space. But certainly, it's probably it's heaviest on town halls, training, and then we'll touch on some marketing. But once you start to extend outside the firewall and things like security become less important, I'd say we're much less differentiated there.
Okay.
Yeah, and our team focuses on two different avenues, right? So we have the external shows and external streams that are going to be on external vendors, typically external CDN platforms. For this talk, we're focusing on inside the firewall, and for that, we actually leverage a couple of different platforms, and we overlap a lot with other departments within LinkedIn. Video conferencing overlaps a little bit. There's some solutions for video conferencing that overlaps, like Blue Jeans and Blue Jeans Primetime that does some of the work. And so our focus internally are either internal-facing conferences, where we have a sales kickoff conference that's a few thousand people within the company that will view, and that has the same limitation in that network infrastructure and the peer distribution that we do has to be there, because if we have 3,000 unicast streams, it's simply not going to work. And so that's where this was all born out of. And so that scales up and down, and that's when we look to somebody like a MediaPlatform to build out that distribution. That's the biggest differentiator really for us. The other parts of that, though, you talked about the town halls. Another piece of it is the DIY, so expecting people within LinkedIn to create their own broadcast and also create their own video and have that internal YouTube piece. And so trying to push a little bit of that away from a dedicated team that's at LinkedIn to actually the sales team or the marketing team can actually do their own.
So basically user-generated broadcast, not just
broadcast
recorded content?
It's fairly limited to recorded video on demand content right now, but the ability will be there. We're just in a transition phase right now, but the ability will be there to be able to do your own. And that's where that overlap gets
taking off, or people are adopting that?
It's literally just about to take off, I'm sure.
Right.
It's going to be big. It's going to be huge.
Huge.
Well, it's one of those things where it sort of, goes along, people start to experiment with it, and then when people start to have success with it, then it does literally take off. So you got to be prepared for that, from a storage perspective, from a networking perspective, all those things.
Or make sure you have the proper guardrails in place, essentially, to assume that it doesn't, too many people don't try and use it once and you break the system.
Yeah. Well, and also a lot of companies, at least regulated companies like health insurance companies, are very concerned about what people are posting.
Right.
So I had one client that was like, we're going to have the legal team review every video that's posted, and that quickly was determined to not be
scalable,
a model that was going to work for them, for anybody. But so then they just said, well, we have the social media policy, let's use the same social media policy. It's just another form of media.
Right.
And we already have rules and regulations, and if you post bad stuff, you're going to get terminated or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, great. I should have mentioned at the start, we do want this to be a conversation. So if you have questions as we're going along, if somebody says something that really grabs your attention, please feel free to raise your hand, shout out, whatever, let us know that you have a question, and make it interactive. This doesn't need to be just me asking them questions. It's really meant to be interactive so that if you have questions you're trying to solve in your enterprise, that we're addressing those questions.
Especially because it seems like almost everybody in here has a system, and there's probably things we can learn from you guys.
That's a fair point, right? You may actually have an interesting question that makes us think differently about the way we do things. So that'd be great. All right, well, let me go on to the next question in the meantime. Oh, question. Thank you, Ken.
Sorry, as I'm listening to the comments and the question that you're asking, I'm just wondering, when it says internal streaming solution, are we talking specifically about something that's going to be used for like inter-office communications, or are we talking about like I'm building it and not buying it?
No, so the question was, is this going to be specifically about inter-office communications or build versus buy? Yeah. It's really meant to be if you are streaming to a large amount of folks for a live stream within the firewall, how are you building that up? Okay. Right? Are you using multicast, peer-to-peer, tiered unicast, whatever it is? And so we wanted to cover those kinds of scenarios and then also hear what kinds of questions all of you had as you look at your technologies and how you might expand, refine them as you go forward.
Well, I think as you build that out, you'll see that there's different pieces that are easily moved out to the cloud if that's the way that you want to be able to deploy it, but then there's certain functionality that needs to live on premise as well. So, like the management software could live in the cloud very easily, but the, caching servers or video servers, need to be deployed on-prem in a lot of cases.
Right. So actually, to that question, sort of what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask the panelists to walk us through a main usage scenario or two that they have in mind or that they've been working on, which will include just talking about those particular topologies so you can actually see what a sample topology might look like. So I think I'm going to actually start with Dan because Dan, you have real-world implementation we can start with, and then we can sort of talk more about some of the other aspects that might get incorporated into some of the other scenarios that both Mike and Andy have worked on.
I think there was another question.
Oh, sorry, did I miss a hand? Yeah. Oh, thank you, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I came here specifically for what Dan, I think, he's been doing a lot of, and we're kind of been looking at platforms similar to what I think Mike is talking about. I work for the LA County Sheriff's Department, IT group. And so for the last 5 years, we've got a contract with a CDN vendor who distributes all of our anything, pretty much any device. And then the problem we were having though is when all of our internal users within our department would go to see that same ceremony internally. They go out the internet, the firewalls, and then they would saturate our internet pipes, bring that content back internally.
Right.
So what we did is we deployed origin servers internally. The streaming engine, the platform that the CDN vendor was using was Wowza. So we deployed origin servers internally, licensing and running Wowza as well. And so it's worked well for us, allowing that now that stream to be done internally, but it's only, right now, we're only supporting it via multicast because we don't have anything built out on the edge or anything at this point internally. So the only thing we do have is we have a VLC player that's on our baseline for all our PCs that supports multicast. And us being from the networking side, we're able to string that out multicast to all of our 1,000 users. They can hit it that way using the player embedded on the intranet side, and it works that way. But the end goal, I think, was to allow video on demand training as well with those origin servers, and also there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done unicast as opposed to multicast. That's kind of holding us back with limit us on the type of players and things like that. So ideally, what we want to do, just to wrap it up, is the idea is to build out the edge servers, storage on the edge of all of our sites that will be running Wowza as well, so that we can cluster and do some of that, localize some of that streaming within our own internal network as well to kind of achieve that end-to-end result.
Okay, so let me see if I can summarize that briefly. You have been using a CDN to deliver. You started using a CDN. It was saturating your inbound network, so you put some origin servers inside and now are multicasting across the organization, but you also are looking at now how you can unicast out to remote sites. So,
Yeah, remote sites that are still into our internal network.
right, right. So remote locations, remote offices, since multicast won't reach those necessarily across your WAN links. Okay, great. So thank you for bringing that up. I think we'll address that in some of the topologies we're going to talk about, and as our panelists go through and answer some of the questions, they'll probably keep that in mind. That idea of how you can augment multicast with a tiered unicast model. Great. So let's start with we'll start with some of these workflows that I'll bring up, and if we don't answer your question by the end, then ask us more questions. All right. Let's start with yours, Dan, if we can. Can you see it all right?
It's slightly convoluted to fit it on one slide, but essentially, I think everybody here knows, has seen something similar to this, and I'll kind of highlight maybe some of the differences. So originally, we obviously have cameras coming into a live switcher. We have audio coming in. We're embedding that. Where it starts to get a little interesting for us is we immediately put that mixed show through an open or closed captioning encoder. And so that's something we're pushing strong for. Heather, who's in the room here somewhere, has pushed that along. So that's becoming really the new standard for us, both for internal and
Making sure
external.
that you have closed captioning.
Yep, available.
Is that for just for those who want that capability internally, or for situations where the sound can't be played, or to meet
It's
requirements?
a couple things. It's for those who require captions. It's also helpful for those if English isn't a second language. It sometimes helps to be able to see the written word.
Yep.
We've noticed that in some feedback. And so that feed is sent over to, in this case, SDI Media that we use for doing the actual captioning. Comes back into the encoder and then feeds out. So we have a couple different options. This is where this transition is happening for us. Currently, we're pushing that to an Elemental Live or a series of Elemental Live encoders. That in turn pushes to Intercall West, who then push that over to Collective, who's doing the peered distribution for us.
So all peer-to-peer there.
All peer-to-peer, as long as people have what's called a collective agent, which is an agent that's sitting on both PCs and Macs. If they're on some other device, it'll actually be a unicast stream.
Right, okay.
That comes directly from West or Intercall. In parallel, we're starting to roll out a Panopto solution. And so there...
And that's the green
That's the green
logo
circle,
at the bottom
yeah,
there.
if
Yep.
it's hard to read. So that's what's a little interesting about that is that there is no RTMP ingest available there. It's HLS ingest, and it's their specific software, either on an encoder that you can buy or on a PC or Mac that you can set up.
Got
so
it.
that has its own drawbacks, as you can imagine. There are some upsides in that they control that that quality. So those are our two inputs, and really the delivery, the part where we're talking about here for within the firewall is for us has been the peered solution. We do not have a multicast network at the moment, so it involves rolling out these agents onto machines and then allowing the peering to take place. And at its most basic, essentially, if you're in an office space and you're the first to receive that stream, you would then act as a peer to up to, I think it's 9 other agents within the system, and then it branches out from there.
So essentially, one person down here in the New York City office gets a stream, they share it with their neighbors around them, they become that point of distribution for at least 9, and then the other neighbors start sharing with other folks
From those
as well.
other 9, and so you
Right.
can, you can be as low as one ingest, one stream coming in, so you don't
Per
have
office,
that
yeah.
huge firewall saturation
Do
piece.
you have you looked at the efficiency? Because I know peer-to-peer sometimes, if you have a really high usage, you can get up. Some claims are up to 97, 98% efficiency. I'm just wondering, in real world, have you seen what that efficiency is when you get
How
pretty
many
good
people are
saturation?
actually on there? We're at about, I think 80 to 90% is where we.
Oh, really?
get
So it really
using
is
that
pretty
piece.
good, and then the rest are just unicast,
Yeah.
the other 10 to 20.
Yep. And the other
Okay.
advantage of this system versus what we used to do, but our old system was basically based on a video conferencing system, and it was all within the VPN. With this, we have security, which obviously required, but you don't have to be on the VPN anymore. So people can watch from their phones, and that was a big one. Really, the only issue that comes out of that is people will be on their VPN and still trying to watch it, and it actually works against it.
Okay.
And then how all the peering part works, I don't know. It's just magic. I was very surprised that it works. Coming from external streaming world, I said, okay, so and it's just going to work.
And it's a
it does.
dedicated agent on each one,
Yeah,
right?
so
It's-
it does take the involvement of your IT team to actually roll that piece out.
Right,
and
it
keep
becomes
that-
part of
keep
your
that up to
desktop
date.
image, I
Yep.
guess. Yeah, okay, great. I saw a hand out here.
The elemental encoder, is that sending out RTMP?
So the
Yeah,
question is the elemental coder
Yeah,
sending out the
that's doing
RTMP?
the main.
The
The main
Seneca Live is not?
Seneca Live encoder is not. That's an HLS stream that's specific to.
Because that's what Panopto requires is HLS for the ingest. Okay. Another question, sir. Go ahead.
You briefly mentioned like starting to have employees, civil employees creating their own broadcast.
Mhm.
How much of the left side is changed when that happens?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry, yeah. So the question was how much when it's DIY, when people are creating their own content live specifically, how much of the left side of this slide, the capture part, you mean? Yeah, changes. So with Panopto and other solutions that I'm sure MediaPlatform does the same thing, you can basically do it from your laptop as if you're doing a Skype call kind of piece. So that does simplify. We're also implementing it within our existing video conference systems and rooms, the Cisco rooms that we have set up. So the quality maybe goes down, but the engagement is much higher because they can literally just open a laptop and do an event. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and the
Okay.
distribution is the same.
Distribution is the same. Yep.
Okay.
Is the internal webcam on the laptop?
Yes. I mean, you can conceivably with, you could throw Wirecast on, but that's not, but for DIY side of things, somebody's really going to be using their laptop. And then for some shows that we do, we conceivably hook up a Thunderbolt connection and can make a laptop act as a Seneca Live encoder in a pinch if we need to.
Okay. Got it. All right, thanks. Let's move on. And Andy, maybe you can walk us through this sort of sample enterprise workflow that's similar to ones you've worked on.
This is sort of the architecture that we typically recommend from a high level when organizations are looking to make a change or implement a whole new system. And what we like to say is that, back in the day when Microsoft was sort of the main platform that most companies use for streaming, there was a lot of providers that built these end-to-end solutions. So you could get the management software, you get the encoders, you get the distribution servers, everything from one company, which was great at the time because it was a fairly new industry and people didn't want to figure out all those things. But
in fact, Mike's company at Corton did exactly that.
Right, exactly. So what we say now is that the architecture that you should try to build is to make use best of breed for each of the different pieces of functionality. Therefore, if there's some brand new whiz-bang encoder that comes out, you can easily just replace that piece of it without having to replace the rest of the solution. So that's number one. Number two is to taking outside of the technology, there's a lot of different types of people that are going to be involved in this, right? You've got your production people. You've got the networking folks that need to be involved from the distribution side of things. You have the corporate communications, which is a marketing department. So there's a lot of different groups that you need to make sure all have their own requirements delivered and are, you know, a part of the initial discussions. I think the projects that I worked on that are typically the most successful are when all the groups have, you know, come to the table and are part of creating the solution versus if just the networking team drives it, then they're going to miss a lot of the key requirements that some of the other organizations have. And then, you know, all these pieces now with modern APIs can all be stitched together very, very effectively. So, and then the other point I wanted to make is that getting the video into the solution and delivering it out really are two different pieces of functionality. So just like what you said is when you're doing your production, you've got your production facilities, you can create that content and then it gets delivered by the system. And then now when people are going to do their user-generated content, it's the same thing. It's the same delivery piece is all the same. It's just the input piece that changes. So in this case, there's a variety of ways you can get video, live video sources or on demand, and one's just a camera, right, hooked up to the production. What a lot of the large organizations I work with do is they use the video conferencing rooms as sort of a studio, so that if the person's in office in Chicago and they want to be able to deliver a webcast from there, they'll video conference back to the production studio. The production people in New York, for example, will run the show. All the person has to do is go into the video conferencing room. It's already got nice lighting, it's got nice mics, and then they can deliver the content from there. Skype for Business is becoming a more popular video source as well. And then in a lot of cases, if you're doing a remote production, like at a hotel or something like this, we would typically recommend that they take an encoder on site, deliver that content back to a decoder, which can then, and then they can run it all through the production back in their facility. So the key point is that it all goes into one production facility and then it gets delivered out from there. So then it will run into an encoder. It can get delivered internally via multicast or peer-to-peer, whatever the company is has deployed for that. And then externally, it can get delivered through streaming service from a CDN. And then obviously on the internal delivery, there's typically an origin server as well, which Wowza is frequently the solution for that.
Okay.
So that's kind of the overview, and then I'll show a specific company.
Briefly run us through this one example.
Yeah, so this is kind of hard to see up here, but
Can you just walk us through?
same type of solution, right? They have the media, the video conferencing as the input into the system, or the media production. They bring that back into what they call a master control center, where they do. They actually record all the videos separately. So they like, let's say there's three people delivering a presentation. One's in Houston, one's in Chicago, one's in London. They'll record all those streams separately, so they have the master files. They'll also mix it live as it's happening, deliver that out. They'll encode it and deliver it. 2 redundant paths out to the organization that they use for to deliver that on the internet, and then internally they'll multicast it on their internal network. So very similar architecture to what Dan has, and very scalable, very consistent, and it can be run really from one location, even though the live stream can come from basically anywhere.
Great, thank you. By the way, with the exception of this slide, all of the slides that you see today will be available on the website later. Okay, and then
Yeah, so
right.
Andy and Dan, your architectural overviews, I think, in my humble opinion, were exceedingly sound. So I don't want to just reiterate what you guys said. In one way, I think this slide maybe elevates things a tiny bit, because by the time Dan chose a company like Collective, I mean, you've done hundreds of hours of reviews. I mean, that's one piece of technology in an ecosystem. As we work with organizations. I mean, I strongly advise of coming up with sort of a holistic vision. You know, for me personally, just based on my experience, and I think this overlays with your two architectures really well, you look at the content creation piece. Do you have a solution for that? Portal services, ways of managing the content, protecting it, administrating users. And then really the submerged part of the iceberg for me, in my experience, has been the delivery piece. And it can be anything from peer-to-peer to, you know, building out sort of your own ECDN solution to the traditional Blue Coat and, you know, Riverbed type solutions. But that's something where if you haven't thought about it in advance, you can really hit a wall. And then analytics and quality of experience and real-time monitoring. You know, the text I added below, because these are kind of tried and true from an architectural perspective, but the text below is somewhat new and maybe some novel things to consider. As Andy alluded to, and I think Dan touched on, video conferencing units as a source. You know, transforming those environments into studio environments is becoming way more prevalent. And I think, you know, we've been sort of misdirected a little bit by terms like unified communications, where we think all these things will, you know, we'll just roll from one to the other. But in some ways, it's more interoperability and being able to leverage one to enable another, enabling or using video conferencing to enable a large live webcast. So I wanted to call that out. Obviously, for anyone in the industry, Skype for Business seems to be just kind of popping up everywhere, and it should be on your checklist. Skipping over portal services and administration, you know, just seeing the importance of things like failover rules and changing the mindset from a shield where you're trying to save yourself from some embarrassment to really using it as a sword and saying, hey, I know this will fail over in milliseconds, but I want to see what percentage of my audience can multicast. Try it for 100%. You get 70% that work, 30% roll over into a different type of distribution methodology. You know, that's something we're seeing more and more prevalent. And then I think Perry would have called out on his slide for Kaltura, you know, on the delivery side, just third-party support and you know, making sure you're thinking about things as not only will it work today as a snapshot of my infrastructure, but can I avoid obsolescence? And then the last thing I want to call out on the bottom, because I think sometimes it gets swept under the carpet, is deployment options. You know, it used to be all on-prem, and then it was, you know, people said we're going to move to the cloud. But as Andy touched upon, you know, you've got 5 key pillars up there. 3 of them could be in the cloud, 2 could be on site. You can have a hybrid deployment. Just thinking pretty in a discriminating way what you want in the cloud and what you want on-prem and what you can manage and what's better managed by others and what the accountants want and all that. So.
All right, so the higher level, thinking through the business aspects as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you put the slides in reverse order and you drill down and you get to Dan's architecture at the end, I mean, that's a manifestation of a lot of hard work and very sound policy.
Right, okay, great, thank you.
Can I quote you on that for my?
Can I quote you on something?
Yeah, a quick aside, that the Skype for Business thing is definitely on our radar. We're undergoing a Microsoft acquisition momentarily, so next year I might have a completely different slide for you.
Oh, yeah.
All right, we'll go back to that. All right, well, let me ask a few questions. Are there any questions from the audience before I go on? Thank you, go ahead.
Talking about changing some of the conference rooms into a little more like production rooms. The company I work for is pretty small, so we don't have like a dedicated like broadcast or our AV team. Do you guys have any guidance or current pointers on what we can do to work on with the rooms a little more self-service for the non-technical employees and stuff?
All right, so I'll repeat the question. If you're a company that already has some of these sort of teleconferencing rooms already set up, what can you do if you don't have a dedicated team to improve those rooms on your own to make them better for being self-service studios, basically, right? Okay, who wants to take that?
Sure, yeah, I mean, we were really lucky. Our team, before I got there, was a unified communication team. There was video conference and AV were one team. It actually separated, but those connections and those interactions still existed, so we were able to come back and, you know, have personal connections with that team that's working on that. From a physical side of thing, we just kept on them to explain to them. We just kept sharing roadmaps. So if you're one team, in theory, you know, you have that single roadmap. But for us, we did struggle with that a little bit to say, we're doing this over here, we've got this solution. Meanwhile, for us particularly, the Blue Jeans primetime was happening in parallel, and we had to kind of get back on the same page. When does this event become an event that needs something over and above, let's say, a Blue Jeans conference? So video-wise or hardware-wise, we just tried to settle on certain levels of certain resolutions and being able to interact between those. So for a while, we were living in 720p, and the VC systems were all 720p true 60, and we had 720p 5994 for broadcast, and so we had to make those kind of little checks to make sure those pieces worked. I don't know how well that answers your question. It seems like you're in an advantageous spot because you're one team working on it, and I think that can actually be good for you.
Yeah, we're looking to do a lot more like video conferencing, so B2B products, such as being able to do some demonstrations and stuff. But the bulk of people who are doing that, I would say, is extremely technical. So
Gotcha.
maybe some steering and stuff.
Yeah,
I've
so-
seen it
Sorry,
like
go ahead.
across the board. Some of the really big companies I've worked with have their own video network operations center. So the person just says, I want to run a broadcast out of this conference room. They set it all up. They take care of it. They literally just walk in and it goes. Obviously, that doesn't sound like that's the case with your organization. But I think one of the things that has really held the video conferencing industry back, and Mike probably knows more about this from his time at Polycom, is people just don't know how to use it. I mean, and it shouldn't be that complicated, right? But it's a combination of, organizations will typically build a control system into the room, so you're supposed to be able to come in and hit a button and say, I want to call somebody. But the problem is the room A and room B and room C are all completely different, so there's no consistency there. So when there's no consistency, people can't learn how to use it. So I'd say if you embark on a system to try to make it easier, make it consistent across the board. All the rooms should operate the same way, and then it's more likely that people will be able to figure out how to use it. And even the video conferencing providers now are creating their own solutions to say, we need to make this easier for people to use, so that I can come in, maybe enter my username and password, and it gives me my calendar, and I literally hit the button and say, start the broadcast.
Yeah, real quick, that's where we got to, was essentially a one-touch meeting solution. And that's is really leaning on vendors to make that happen. It's hard to do. You have a team inside that drives what you want, but it's a vendor solution, honestly.
And are you using something like Crestron panels or
Yes.
tablets or what?
Yeah,
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's sort of a related question. In terms of, at the video creation point, it could be anything from a single camera, or a web camera, up to a broadcast studio with a encoder out of the switcher. As you go through the levels of that, what sort of integrators do you use? I mean, at the extreme, it's easy. It's like if I'm doing a full broadcast studio, I'm going to bring in a broadcast integrator, and if it's a simple one, I may wind up with somebody who's putting in restaurant with me. But I mean, there's all in between there, or are there emerging vendors or service providers who can deploy something like that, or is that a whole of the industry right now?
All right, let me
That's
repeat the
Andy.
question, I think. So if you're creating content creation spaces, right now there's a range from anybody using a web camera to a full broadcast studio. How do you build those out? What kind of integrators are there that can build out across that whole expanse from webcam to broadcast studio, or is there a hole there in the market somewhere along that spectrum?
Andy, do you go that far into the production side of it, or?
I usually would work with the customer to create the architecture that we want, and then they would typically have their own AV integrator that they would work with, and we would need to make sure that they were versed well on the streaming technologies, because a lot of times they aren't. They certainly, most of them would have video conferencing experience, but they need to know how to sort of stitch those together. And then, so that's like sort of the traditional AV integrators, and they need to, expand their knowledge so that they can do streaming type stuff. But certainly from a broadcast and video conferencing perspective, they know how to do that. And then you have, if it's a Cisco type customer, a lot of times they'll use their own, their Cisco integrators, and Cisco has a specific, collaboration. There's even like a network, a CCIE or whatever you can get for collaboration. So there's people that specifically focus on that, in order to roll out Cisco solutions. But if that's the case, you're often choosing a lot of the Cisco functionality and not much else. Although they are going in the direction of integrating with Skype for Business now. So that's I think a big step forward for the industry.
And just really quickly, I'd add to that from a vendor perspective. I think if you're looking at the software pieces of the equation, you should lean really heavily on the vendor because the channel's not quite as well versed as Andy alluded to some of the software pieces of the platform. I think where you'll see the channel more visible in streaming is when you have an appliance, like capture and streaming appliance on the education side, where there's hardware they can fix, they're comfortable with that, they're already working within real estate, if you will, whether it's a conference room, a classroom, a boardroom. But when you start talking about things like managing content across an enterprise and leveraging an ECDN and all this stuff, quality assurance monitoring, it's just a little bit of a different beast. But I will tell you, and this isn't just a media platform thing, I think any vendor you talk to in the space, we would work really collaboratively with Andy. But at the same time, I'd better have subject matter experts who can architect and put out schematics and do all the things that'll ensure you're successful.
Yes, sir.
Hi, so one of the questions we kind of touched on this point. So when you have your VC call, and that's going to be your kind of origin or your source for your content you're distributing, wouldn't you kind of ideally bring that back to like a master control or in terms of monitoring it and making sure that you're kind of whether you're taking back a production switch and then sending out to an encoder? What's the recommended approach on that? At the moment, you've got people like Kano pushing these together like Skype for Business. So at that point, you're already out there, already got the call there, you can hang an encoder off that. Should you be leaning toward making that more self-service, or should you bring that feed back into your master control and send the stream out? At what point do you kind of want to take hands-off so it can scale faster and bigger and the customer take control versus putting that kind of higher level production quality, whether it's switching or cable or something like that? What are you thoughts on that?
Does one of you want to briefly summarize?
I can take a shot at that.
Yeah.
I think it really depends on what the
Can you summarize the question?
Oh,
Sorry.
the question was, what's the best method of getting video conferencing feeds back into a master production type situation, and how do you make that more self-service for certain people to use? I think, so I would say it depends a lot on who's delivering the presentation and how big it's going to be. If it's a CEO or a town hall meeting for the whole company, then you typically would want that to be a highly produced and highly designed and understood environment. If it's going to be a group VP delivering a webcast to 100 of their direct reports, then maybe that's something that you can let the user drive a little bit more on their own. But I think as we've all been talking about, you want to make that a consistent delivery solution, whether it's highly produced or if it's user generated. Once you get it into sort of that production type environment, and maybe the production environment's just I'm streaming it from my room, or it's just going from the room to the production, nothing's happening to it, it's just a video stream and then it's going out. But that should be a very consistent process so that you can, A, have the flexibility to change it in the future if you need, but B, also be able to really quickly do the analytics that Mike was talking about and troubleshoot any problem that might come up.
Yeah, your question is one that we struggle with all the time. And we have our own rating system for how many bodies essentially to throw at it and how to do it. And the way we do it right now is we mix, let's say, London, New York, Singapore into a bridge through VC, and then that in turn comes down into a production switcher. So there are essentially two shows going on. Some people are watching over VC, we're doing a broadcast show. So that is essentially a sub switch over here in VC that's happening on the bridge in the cloud, is frantically trying to bring these other people in and out of the show. And so we don't have the perfect solution yet. I think there are some things out there. I know West has some ideas about bridging, and I think I know that Blue Jeans do also. So it's a difficult thing, and like I say, we rate it and we throw bodies at it. We don't have the perfect solution yet.
When you can create the same solution and serve two wildly different use cases. So for instance, creating content from video conferencing system is supposed to sort of democratize and move towards self-service, but we recently did an implementation for a financial services company that they could care less about self-service because they wanted to use those locations for executives around the world to create these panel-type discussion webcasts, and they know their people are on planes every day, and it was never going to be self-service. This was going to be white glove the whole way. I mean, these executives were not going to touch the system, but it's the exact same infrastructure. So I'd say, you know, in looking, well, your vendor should be asking tons and tons of questions, because unlike architectures, which can be kind of generalized and there's some best practices, I think every company is different, and you may truly want to democratize and empower everybody to create content, or that could be your worst nightmare. And you know, you just have to really get to the bottom of what kind of policies you want in place, who you want to enable, why, and what your company culture is. There's no wrong answer.
All right, yes, sir.
Question for Dan. We're currently looking at ECDNs to solve our distribution challenge currently. So I saw you pick Collective. Who else did you look at?
So the question for Dan was, you're looking at ECDNs and you saw that LinkedIn chose Collective, and you're also wondering who else they looked at for ECDNs.
Who else we should look at?
Yeah.
Plus you should look at,
Maybe
you
that's a
should
better
look
way to
at
put it.
MediaPlatform. We looked at MediaPlatform before Mike was there. Now he's there, so we can look at it again.
Very diplomatic.
Yeah, I don't know how. There's the Hive is another one that's out there. We didn't look specifically at that, but I know that's one of the solutions that we're looking at now.
Hive streaming,
Hive
peer-to-peer.
streaming, yeah.
Have you looked at any of the other peer-to-peer platforms as well? ViBlast, StreamRoot, Peer5?
No, those were the biggies that were out there at the time. Were those two, and even Hive was
Right.
relatively new. You know, this
Yeah.
is 2 or 3 years ago, and we were looking at it. And then the Adobe solutions.
And one of the nice things too about most of these peer-to-peer platforms now is that they're using HTML5, so you don't have to have a user agent installed as part of the desktop image, and it'll work across mobile devices as well.
I'd just add to that, and we're not like really in the ECDN space. I mean, for some of our customers, they'll need to supplement their infrastructure, and it's a pretty easy way to supplement it cost effectively. But I mean, most of the companies in the video content management or enterprise video platform space should have some sort of cost-effective ECDN, which is not to say it's not peer-to-peer. I don't know any of the enterprise video platform players that have their own peering solution. They're partnering. And again, going back to my slide, and I think both these guys, you know, on their slides, you're going to have to see a lot of cooperation with third parties, because at the end of the day, it's got to work, and no one's going to own every piece of the ecosystem. In fact, I think as Andy said explicitly, you've got to be able to swap things, essentially hot swap things out and replace them whenever you need them.
Right, we've gone far past the days of proprietary stacks and gone to where everything needs to be interoperable pretty much.
Yeah, I would also say it's, again, it comes down to the culture of the organization. So I've worked with a couple places that if you started getting peer out of your mouth, they would be like, no way, not even.
Well, sure, they would think Napster and
Yeah,
BitTorrent and
not-
Java agents on my machines.
Don't even
no
bring
way.
that up. That'll never fly here.
Right.
So in that case, then you have to use, you know, some sort of, you know, more traditional caching solution, or even, you know, Wowza servers can be deployed at the different offices as well. But everything can be virtualized too. So a lot of organizations are like, well, I don't want to have to put another server in. It's like, well, you don't really have to put another server in. You just need to put a VM on the existing server that you have out of those offices that can, that's doing, you know, whatever, storage, print, whatever
right.
it does.
You can
And a lot of organizations
make
do that.
an existing server multi-purpose. That way it's pretty lightweight to do a lot
Yeah.
of those streaming and caching operations now.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if you go, you know, the traditional sort of more eCDN providers like Riverbed and Bluecoat, a lot of cases, you know, they don't want to just sell a video caching solution. They want to sell application acceleration, a lot of things. So then the conversation typically goes up a level, which also sort of complicates the implementation. So sometimes that can be good because somebody else can help foot the bill for it, but sometimes it can be bad because it overly complicates it and drags it on for too long.
Right. All right, in terms of what you see changing today in terms of streaming protocols, streaming formats, and technologies, what, given those and keeping those in mind, what are the really hard problems that you're trying to solve for either your own corporation or your customers as you think about those changes in protocols and formats?
Sure. I mean, there's always something you're trying to solve for, right? So at first it was just to get a reliable system that can feed 10,000 people a stream. Now we want it at multi-bit rate. We want audio-only streams for people who are on their phones. We want it HD all the way through. We want people to be able to create their own content. So there's the piece that we're focusing on now is actually upleveling the quality of the shows that we're doing. On the back end, we expect to honestly be turning through vendors, not vendors, but solutions every couple of years. Like we're finding that both with VC, video conference, and with distribution, these new things come along quite often. So it's interesting to hear that so many people have systems out there. I don't know if we're more aggressive in that sense, but every 2 or 3 years, we're expecting there might be something new and different.
So every couple of years, you'll reevaluate what you have, make sure your vendor's either keeping up with the changes or look at changing out to a different vendor.
Yeah, and for example, our shift over to more of a Panopto solution is because we need more of that DIY solution in there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Mike or Andy, any comments to add?
I'm looking at this a little bit from a vendor perspective, so it might not be applicable to any one person's needs, but we're seeing a lot where the organization is now successfully webcasting, and they're doing so reliably, and they're trying to understand from more of a trend perspective what they're actually accomplishing, and also from a reliability perspective, ensuring that the experience is categorically enjoyable to everyone. So from a trend analysis perspective, it's a migration from enabling organizations to track an event, a person within an event, activities within an event, and looking at that over time and being able to merge that data. I don't know if this is something that's just kind of a hot button issue among the Global 2000, but there's been a lot of pressure applied on us, and certainly it's been an area where over the last year a lot of our R&D has been focused, and being able to provide dashboards where in very real time you can see what the quality of experience is around the world, and to preemptively jump in and help folks, if you see buffering issues and things like that, and say, a lot of these people won't complain, and historically that's been a blind spot in the provision of our service, is that we're just guessing, and if no one complained, we're guessing everybody had a good experience. This is visibility into that. So that's an area of, I guess, innovation, and certainly from a format perspective and things like that, and delivery, there's a hell of a lot going on.
So do you build that off your existing analytics that you're offering?
It's kind of bifurcated. So you have analytics that are sort of use case oriented. So CorpCom will drive an initiative, and they'll want to be able to track content over time. And most of that is most valuable in a postmortem. So we looked at 3/4 of events, and here are the trends we're seeing. And it can touch on quality of experience, but it's more reach, duration of viewership, interaction. It can get into training where you're measuring performance on tests, things like that. And then the other is you're in IT, and you've just rolled out multicast infrastructure, and you want to make sure everybody's having an enjoyable experience. And you're watching levers go back and forth.
Yeah.
And that, it was funny from a licensing perspective. We wanted to enable people to use it and really get a sense of whether it was valuable or not. And we said, well, maybe we'll just enable them to keep the content or the analytics for 48 hours. Well, the utility is almost zero after about 15 minutes. So it was like, okay, we just, because it's a dashboard, it's a console, and it's like you're in NASA, watching. And so the post-mortem value for that and the trend value for that is probably less, but it's a pretty cool experience watching it.
Yeah, I think that's really important because in being able to understand what's happening, especially with a live event while it's happening, and being able to fix it while it's happening is a huge advancement. Because in a lot of cases, people just say, if there's trouble at the office in Jacksonville, then well, sorry, it's not working in Jacksonville. You're going to have to watch it on demand, you know. And then it was a post-mortem thing. It's like, what happened? What went wrong? Is it a network thing? Is it something with our solution? So that's big. I think you know, we've been hearing about this for a long time. You know, Flash is still pretty prevalent, especially from multicast for you know, if it's H.264 video, which everybody wants now so that they can watch it on mobile devices and things like that. There's not been a lot of great solutions to sort of replace the Windows Media Multicast functionality, which was a lot of the companies are actually still using. So I'd like, you know, Ramp has some interesting solutions they're coming out with. I think, I don't want to speak for Mike, but I think MediaPlatform's working on some stuff. And I think, so that's really important because it's still, to be able to deliver a very large event, there's nothing better, in my opinion, than multicast because it allows you to increase that quality substantially. You know, Deloitte, who's one of the clients that I work with, they multicast their live streams at 2.5 megabits per second. And you talk to a lot of networking people, they're like, what? No way. No way could I ever support that kind of bandwidth on my network. And he said, well, you actually can if you have multicast enabled. It doesn't even touch, you know, the network if you're doing that. So, you know, I think that's important. And also, you know, multicast doesn't work on mobile devices today. So if you're watching it on an iPad, that's all unicast. So that, you know, those kind of things need to be looked at. I think as more and more content is being created and there's more, you know, DIY or user-generated content, then that starts to become a storage problem as well. So you have to sort of manage the life cycle of the content. And I think that's something that a lot of people are struggling with now too, is like, I'm getting all this content that's being created. What do we do with it? You know, how long do we keep it? Is it 6 months? Is it a month? Is it, you know, and that's where it points to the analytics are really important to be able to determine how to best, you know, most effectively manage your content.
Right, okay. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
I hear a lot about vendors that people say multicast, multi-data, unicast, because of all the modes are pushed. What do you guys think?
So the question is, the audience member says, all right, I hear a lot about multicast going dead, unicast becoming the preferred model, especially with all the mobile devices out there that can't do multicast. What do you guys think about that?
So I disagree with that because, and the real reason is because there are pockets of very large user bases within organizations. So let's say you have a headquarters that has 10,000 people and then you have 10 offices that have 100 people each. You could do unicast at those 100 user offices pretty effectively, but in the headquarters, that means you've got 10,000 people trying to access a 2.5 megabit per second stream. You have to have a pile of servers to be able to support that. And so that's really why I think multicast is going to be, you know, still be around forever, because it's the most effective way to deliver that solution. And, you know, the mobile devices, I think people are going to create solutions so that you can watch a multicast on a mobile device. It's really not technically that challenging.
Any other thoughts from the panel?
Although Mike might disagree with that.
I mean, what I'm seeing in large enterprises is they rely very, very heavily on multicasting, and they're also coming up with Plan B, just in case. I happen to agree with Andy. I think, you know, we'll bridge the gap, and there are already companies that are coming out with sort of interim solutions, and they seem to work. That being said, I'm seeing a lot more peer-to-peer. I'd say you're progressive in your infrastructure, but it's certainly sound way of delivering, and I think it'll become more and more popular, in part because people are looking for that Plan B. So we have several, I mean, Fortune 50 companies that have, you know, Hive or a Collective or Ramp or someone like that in a non-production environment, and they're beating the hell out of it, and, you know, that will be their Plan B if we don't bridge the gap.
Right. All right. Well, there may be more questions. Please come up afterwards and ask those. We'll stick around for a few minutes. We have reached the end of our hour, so I want to thank our panelists for sharing their expertise and all of you for interacting with us.
Can I say one thing very rudely, but as a shill? So, if this stuff is interesting to you, we're hiring someone to do this kind of thing at LinkedIn. Shameless plug.
Nice.
All right, thank you,
Come
everybody.
to Streaming Media Show and you get a job.
It's all about the networking.
Right.